Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amor de Soi Wellness. And Donovan Jensen is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my co-host, Donovan. And today I have a very special guest. I'm very excited. My dear old friend from way back, Dr. Maya Rockeymoore Cummings is a policy expert and business owner on a mission to drive society towards inclusion, which is so needed right now with all the division that's been happening in the country, especially this past year. And so I'm really excited to have you here. Please welcome Dr. Maya. How are you doing today?
Dr. Alice, I am doing wonderfully. I am so pleased to be with you and your co-host.
Thank you. Great. Well, yeah, let's just get started and dive in. And why don't you share with our audience, like, what was your story that led you to your path in politics, global policy, all of that?
Well, I'm the fourth generation from slavery in this country, and that usually shocks people because they think of 4 generations not necessarily being so long. But the fact of the matter is that my parents grew up in the Jim Crow South, and I grew up with them telling us stories about what it was like to actually have to go into the back doors of stores and how they couldn't try on clothes in stores, how they had to sit in the Negro only section of the movie theater, how they had to drink out of Negro only water fountains. And our lives were very different because my dad went into the Air Force during the Vietnam War era, and we lived on or near integrated military bases the entire time. And so my life was completely integrated. I mean, went to school with kids of all different backgrounds, lived in neighborhoods with kids of all different backgrounds, played together, prayed together. We were basically we saw each other on the level of our common humanity. And my whole thing is if we can do that on military bases across the country, why can't we do that in civilian society? And the answer is that we can. And yet nobody has set a standard for us to actually expect that of each other. But also, we have a legacy and a history of structural discrimination where we've actually set up our communities and our neighborhoods and even our labor market in striated ways, basically, where we have segmented people off and limited opportunity, limited chances of their development, even limited their opportunities to live long and healthy lives. Based on discriminatory notions of who is deserving and who is not. And I'm saying that absolutely has to end. We can do better than that, and we are better than that, but we've got to do better.
Absolutely. We absolutely can. And I love that you're on this mission to close that gap between people that really has been destroying our country for this past, I don't even know how many years it's been happening, for a long time. And I understand, like, that's also the title of your late husband's book as well. And I don't know if you want to speak a little to that.
So as you well know, we have had divisions in this country since before this country began.
That's true.
And that women were not written into the Constitution. People of color were seen as less than human. I mean, literally the only people who counted at that time were, basically white men who were wealthy. And so we've become a society where we have challenged ourselves to do better and to be better continuously, but it has always involved a struggle. The struggle for women's rights, the struggle for civil rights, the struggle for human rights, LGBTQ rights.
Yes.
All of these things, ableism, I mean, all of these have been movements of people trying to bring awareness to our society about how, segments of our society or groups within our society have been mistreated historically. And the demand is that we can actually build a truly multiracial, multicultural society where everyone is respected, but we have to actually drum that home that is the standard that we expect. Now, in terms of my late husband's book, it covers, his life. He grew up in the Jim Crow South. He was my parents' age. They were in the same category. He was 20 years older than me. And so he lived a segregated life in his early childhood. And he was, on top of that, he was labeled special education, came from a poor household. And so he had a lot of obstacles and hurdles in his way at a very young age. And he wanted young people to know that if he could overcome them, then they could too. He was one of the first cohorts of African Americans to integrate Baltimore City public schools. He went on to graduate from Howard University, Phi Beta Kappa, graduated from the University of Maryland Law School in 3 years, got passed the bar on the first time, literally became like the first ever African-American Speaker Pro Tem of the Maryland House of Delegates, and then became a very powerful US Congressman. And so in his book, he talks about his trials and travails with, frankly, with Donald Trump. As the chairman of the Oversight and Reform Committee, he had to actually lead the investigations of most of the Trump administration's, actions.
Wow.
Everything from, what happened with the Russians in the 2016 election, to Donald Trump's tax returns and finances, to Jared and Ivanka's security clearances, to what was happening to the kids on the southern border, to the census question that asked about citizenship. I mean, all of this was in his purview. He had interactions with Mr. Trump, and, basically he wanted to warn the American people that unfortunately he gave him the benefit of the doubt when he started out. But what he saw going, along the way was that this man was not only not right for the position, not to be trusted, he also, he felt, was a danger to our democracy and to our humanity.
Yeah, there's a lot of just like really recent history that I don't think a lot of people consider. And I know this is pulling you back a little bit from what you're saying before, but what do you think the differences were? And maybe you don't have the full historical context, but maybe you do. I definitely don't. But why do you think the military was a place that was able to kind of have this better integration path, whereas you don't see that as well in a lot of businesses or just in general society? Where do you think that distinction came from, and where do you think the split was?
It was mandated. The military mandated it in the late 40s and then made it a reality in the early 50s. They felt it was ineffective and inefficient to actually have two systems of everything to actually accommodate blacks and whites. And that, you can't win wars if you're divided from within. You've got to actually have a unified force in order to fight the enemy without. And so, they made a conscious and strategic decision to fully integrate every aspect of life in the military. And what you have seen is that, the fear in larger society is that if you integrate, that it's going to be damaging to, white kids. It's going to be damaging to their ability to thrive. It's going to be damaging to their intelligence. They're not going to learn as well with kids of color who aren't smart in their thinking in their classrooms. And the fact of the matter is, listen, I lived in 9 different places all across the country before I graduated from high school. And I can tell you there were smart white kids, there were smart black kids, there were smart Latino kids, there were smart Asian American kids, there were smart Native American kids, there were dumb black kids, there were dumb white kids, there were dumb Latino kids, there were dumb Asian American kids, there were dumb Native American kids. The fact of the matter is that, you have, there's diversity on every kind of, and when I say dumb, I don't mean to be disparaging. When I say dumb, what I mean to say is that everybody is blessed with different talents in life. And, frankly, I'm dumb when it comes to mathematics, but I'm great when it comes to English and history. And so, we all have different skills and abilities, and it's present across humanity, not just a characteristic of a skin color. And it's stupid to actually think that it's a characteristic of a skin color. And so we are dealing with antiquated, antediluvian, prehistoric belief systems when it comes to race in this country. And it's time for us to get over it.
Yeah, beautifully expressed. And I really agree with that sentiment in that, everyone, if anything, having more exposure to a variety of races and cultures enhances your knowledge and your perspectives and can contribute to yourself in understanding so much more about the world and society, that you're opening your perspective in a lot of ways.
Let me tell you, not only are you opening your perspective, but you're actually burnishing your credentials to actually do well in your career and in life. I do think that the currency of the 21st century is your ability to navigate different people and cultures in a way that makes you multilingual in another way, not in terms of language, but multilingual in terms of knowing how multicultural, knowing how to communicate, get along with, understand, empathize, just basically work collegially with people of all different backgrounds. Because, many of our corporations are diverse. Some operate on an international level. You can't come to a workplace thinking provincially and thinking that, that you're just going to, excel with a narrow mindset. I do think that you have to be broad in your thinking and think about your customers, your customer base, whether you're providing products or services, government or non-governmental, as a whole, not just in terms of one population group, but in terms of everybody, and you'll do well.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. It'd be better for business if you can interact with a wider population. And it just kind of reminded me of this story a friend had told me of this. He had moved to London, and he had a redneck friend from like Texas or Oklahoma or somewhere who just, had never traveled outside of the country ever in his life. And he finally decided this is the kind of guy that has like a shed full of guns. Like that's what he does. He collects the guns, and he was like really adamant and believed that all Muslims were trying to kill him. It was like the belief that he was carrying in his brain. When he went to London to visit his friend, that friend actually had him go to dinner with his Muslim friend and have him interact and realize, oh, hey, not all Muslims are trying to kill me. I can actually have a civil, enjoyable conversation with another human being, because they are really essentially another human being with the same issues and problems that we all deal with as humans.
So it's stereotypes, right?
Yeah, it's stereotypes.
It's you watch television or the movies, and you think that all Muslims, if you don't have a broad level of experience with people in your immediate circles, then you think that all Muslims are X, or all Black people are Y, or all women are Z. And the fact of the matter is that, the stereotypes do damage to our ability to navigate the world. And so, once he has the exposure, and once people have exposure, then they know better and they do better, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like blanket statements or generalizations about any group of population is just not a great way to navigate through the world. And I'd be curious to hear, what are your ideas or strategies as far as like closing the divide and promoting more division? Like what do you have in mind for us as a society?
So I am writing a book called Rageism, and the idea is that, in terms of politics and policy, we actually need to put guardrails around our systems to actually kind of eliminate the role of discrimination in terms of how we serve people. And so, there are all kinds of tools and practices that I'm discussing in this book about how we do that. We've had a history of trying to do it, but I don't think that we always do it, and we don't do it well most of the time. I also think that we need to tackle, Hollywood. I think that Hollywood is doing us all a disservice, when they operate in traffic and stereotypes. And so, you can't change the hearts and minds of people without changing the imagery that they actually see and ingest in life. And so I think that it's important that we get that under control too. And then, I do think that schools and communities need to do a better job of exposure and education. History that needs to be diverse, education and exposure to different people and cultures. I mean, all of this needs to be a part of how we actually grow young people who are sensitive, aware, and empathetic, and who are knowledgeable and able to navigate and, thrive in a very diverse society. So, for those who live by the way, I've lived in Oklahoma. I've lived in Texas. I have lived in Illinois. I have lived in Washington State. I have lived in places that are considered very white.
Mhm.
And so, the fact of the matter is that, it's just about exposure. And so, I do think that just with a little bit of effort, that can be done.
Mm. Yeah.
I'd be curious to dig in a little bit more, and I don't want to, try to back you into a corner or anything, but like dig in a little bit more on what you think some of the steps or policies or things that we can do. Like, you said some of the things we've tried, but they haven't really worked, and there's some things that you think might work better. I'd be curious to open that conversation up a little bit more.
I mean, in the area of, listen, you can take it in any area you like, because in every area, almost every area that exists, there are disparities. So in terms of voting rights, they put into place the Voting Rights Act of 1965, I think it was. Yeah, Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And the Supreme Court in the year 2013 came and gutted a key portion of that legislation. And that opened the doors for all of this voter suppression that we're now seeing in terms of people, parties, political parties, actually one political party in particular, to basically try to throw people off the voting rolls, to close, ID licensing places and counties that are disproportionately Black and brown, to move voting facilities away from, college campuses so students can't vote. I mean, literally all this stuff to try to keep people from voting has been enabled by I think the ill-advised decision of the Supreme Court in 2013 when they gutted the Voting Rights Act. Now Congress has to come back and legislate. They need to fix it. But we tried before and it was invalidated. Now they need to fix it. On the area of health, we have all these health disparities, including the disparities that have been exacerbated by COVID. And so, what we're going to need to do is data is going to be important. All these places have been declaring racism a public health threat, but you can't operate and close gaps without the data to actually show you where the gaps are, and then without health equity strategies in order to actually mitigate the gaps. So what do I mean? Equity is not equality. Equality is saying everybody has to say the same thing. Equity means that you actually have to fill the gaps and the holes as needed to bring everybody up to the same level. And that might mean that some communities or some geographical areas need more assistance or more attention in order to bring them up to the desired level. And so we have to be comfortable as a society with the equity strategy and not just declare equality, because what we're trying to do is fill in historical gaps that have created these inequities. And that means that we have to be strategic about it. So, operating to close those inequities means not just collecting the data, but also then developing the programmatic and policy strategies to actually close the gaps. And then, you can go across the board on incarceration, you can, schooling and education. I mean, literally, there are so many ways that this can be done.
No, that's great. That helps kind of make it a little bit more concrete, because I think sometimes it's not always clear what the next steps are, or the solutions, or the places to move into. So it's nice to get a little bit more perspective on just some of the places. And as you said, I think for the most part, it's pretty clear to most people that it ranges across all sorts of things. But it's nice to just, have some of those bullet points or areas to kind of like key in on.
Absolutely. That's why I'm writing the book.
So important. Yes.
And what was it like growing up in Utah?
I personally have had a very, I would say, different experience than most of the people here. So I have a couple siblings that are biracial. Not at all the norm. My mom's significant other is an African-American man, or was at the time. So I got to see something that I don't think a lot of people see in predominantly white areas, which is the huge disparity in treatment by other people, right? So I would see, people doing things that seem unspeakable or just unimaginable in other places, right? Like I've lived in the Bay Area. I lived in Kansas City for a short period of time. Things like people driving by and yelling, racial slurs and things like that. And also experiences like I was dating a girl and she was going to come over to my house and meet my mom and her boyfriend. And I remember very distinctly her asking, well, how am I supposed to act? What am I supposed to do? I was like, what do you mean? What are you supposed to do? Like, if he's rude, then treat him like you treat people that are rude to you. If he's nice, treat him like, what do you mean? Like, I don't understand what you're even saying. And another piece that I think is a little bit different for me, my mom had me read Roots when I was in 6th grade. Probably a little too heavy for the age I was. But I feel like, I got a lot more context, right? A lot more of the history and the actual like graphic detail of the history than a lot of my peers. So to me,
that book was like this thick.
I know. Trust me, I know. I remember. But so I think I had a little bit different of experience, and then like we've been talking about, a little bit more exposure to some of these things. So like you were saying, with the military experience, I felt a lot more integrated, at least in terms of like these are people. Like people are people. Like however they act, and how you're saying everybody has different abilities and whatnot. Like it came much more easily to me to just be like, okay, well, we're gonna see how these people act, and then we'll go from there. But it has been very clear to me as I've moved around, as I've seen other experiences and whatnot, the difference between having that exposure and not having that exposure. Not to put that old girlfriend on blast, but like that experience of her being like, how do I act, was so confusing to me, and I had no tools at the time to explain to her. Like and it was just so foreign. So, and I don't think that's a super uncommon experience. So maybe that's a direction that we can take this, so that I'm not talking and taking all your guest time, but to increase exposure to things like that, do you have any ideas or things that don't involve reading this big of a book that might help people be able to kind of broaden their horizons or the way that they kind of look at the world?
I mean, that goes back to what I said about education in schools. Curriculum matters. And when you've got curricula where people are playing politics with curricula, currently Senator Tom Cotton, I think of Arkansas, I think he is trying to prevent a curriculum based on the 1619 Project from getting into schools anywhere in the country. The 1619 Project was a project of the New York Times, where they talked about the evolution of slavery in the United States of America in all areas: business, medicine, religion, science, you name it. And so you've got U.S. senators actively trying to prevent young people of all backgrounds from getting that education. You might ask yourself why. What's the threat of young people learning about slavery in our country from a non-romanticized viewpoint, from a historically accurate viewpoint? What is wrong with that? Why is that such a threat, Tom Cotton? And I think it's because, they don't want people to become educated. They don't want people to actually, start to question the white supremacist worldview. They want to keep people from actually having that exposure because then, they get to perpetuate the lie. And this is an even bigger lie than what happened in the last election. And that bigger lie is that that the lie that they like to tell is that we're not all equal. The reality is that we're all human beings, and it's through curricula, it's through education and exposure. If you live in a remote area, it's going to have to be through curricula and through programming on television and whatnot. But if you live in a diverse area and you're segmented in your community because you might live in the wealthy side of town, which typically is whiter. And you don't, then you are in the same community with people who are diverse. That means that, you need to be participating in intramural activities across the city, making sure that you are getting to know people of diverse backgrounds through the experiences that you have both in the school environment and the after school environment, summer time as well.
Mm. Really, really useful. And one of the things I was thinking about, because I think there's a lot of people that they're not intentionally trying to hurt or be racist, but there's kind of like this ignorance in that they don't know any better, and they're like Donovan's ex-girlfriend, who was just like, I don't know how I should be. And that's something as a minority woman myself that I experience on a regular basis, where it's just like and I just don't want to interact with it because I'm just like annoyed of the ignorance, and like how people come up to me and say ni hao ma even though I don't speak Chinese, and that's just an assumption based on the color of my skin. And I'm just wondering, for the people that are not quite, they're not ill-intentioned or they're not trying to hurt people, but they just, yeah, they need the exposure, they need the education. But what would you want to say to these people that like want to do better? They don't want to be unknowingly racist or do anything of that nature. Like, what would you suggest to them if you could?
I would say, great. I am so glad that you want to learn about other cultures. And a part of learning is actually sometimes making mistakes. Let me tell you my story. My dad retired and we moved to San Antonio, Texas. And that's where I graduated from high school. But I came back the summer after my first year of college and got an internship at a bank downtown. I became fast friends with two older Latina women who took me under their wing and showed me the ropes at the bank and, all this other stuff. We would go out to lunch literally every day. I loved them and they loved me. So one day we were sitting out at lunch and I just said, oh, so do you all go back to Mexico to visit your relatives? And they looked at me and then they looked at each other and they just burst out laughing. And if I were white, I would have been beet red. and the fact of the matter is that I didn't know that asking them that question was like them asking me, do I go visit my relatives in Africa? The fact of the matter is that their people have been in what we consider the United States of America for centuries. And I didn't know that, I just assumed that everybody had migrated across the Rio Grande River and set up shop in Texas. And so they had to educate me, and they didn't get offended, but they had to educate me. And I had to go through that embarrassing moment so that I could learn.
Yeah. I'm hearing it's like being willing to be embarrassed for one, to be, like a sense of humility in a way. And the other thing I think and I would love to hear your thoughts about it, is that I think like fear stops people. Like they're afraid of being embarrassed. They're afraid of looking stupid to like ask the questions.
Or worse, being called a racist.
Or be called a racist. So that stops them. What are your thoughts about like addressing the fear?
Yeah, so fear is a real thing. I'm not going to act like it doesn't stop people, and yes, it does. But I would say, start small. Don't start by trying to rub people's, afros. Violating their personal space and their educational experience. Start by, doing some reading, doing some exploration on your own, and then come from a place of some semi-literate, semi-informed perspectives to actually broach conversations that might be delicate, and explain up front that you're trying to learn because you believe that, that it's important to have a multicultural society, that you believe that, in relations between all people, and that you're trying and striving to be better and to do better. And so, open up the conversation with vulnerability.
Mm.
What do you think? Is that the right approach, Alice?
Oh, my perspective, I agree. When you were saying that, what I was thinking in my head, I was like, I would love for someone to actually ask me that. Like, rarely, like, oh, I'm curious to understand, like, what is it like to be an Asian American in the US? And I've been asked a few times, actually was on a podcast about it a little while ago. It has yet to be published, but I was like, I actually would love to like share my opinions, but I'm rarely like asked. And yeah, they don't know any better, but it's just, I think being curious would get me excited to like, oh yeah, I'm happy to fill in the blanks or the gaps for you, or at least share my perspective. I know that my perspective as an Asian American not maybe exactly the same of everyone else out there, but I can share from my own lived experience and what that's like. And if you're curious, I'm happy to share.
So what is it like, Alice?
It's
Fong?
yeah, it's been challenging in a way because it's like something similar that would always have to. I used to waitress. I'm Chinese American, but I used to waitress at a Japanese restaurant, a couple Japanese restaurants. So there was lots of assumptions that I was Japanese, even though most people in Japanese restaurants aren't actually Japanese. Just FYI, they're just some sort of Asian kind of a thing. But don't make assumptions that you know which one. For one, but the question that I would always consistently get asked is like, where are you from? And in the back of my mind, I knew they meant like what country I'm from. And I was like, I remember this couple came in one day and asked me like that question. And I was like annoyed, but I was like, I'm from California. It's like, where I'm from. It's like, I knew they meant country, but I was like, I'm just gonna say I'm from California because that's true. And then they like had a push the boundary. They didn't quite get it. And they were like, no, like, where are you originally from? And I was like, I'm originally from California. and then I was just like, okay, I don't want to cause a scene or, you know, humiliate them or make them feel embarrassed. So I was like, I think what you meant to ask is like, what is my heritage? And my heritage is Chinese. So I followed it up with that.
And what did they say?
And I think they kind of was like, oh, okay. And they just kind of went back to eating, and they weren't like curiously engaged by any means. But if they were, I would have been like excited in those moments because I get the question like, where are you from a lot, and with the intention, like you wouldn't ask a white person that. It's like, I wouldn't go up to like a redhead and be like, so are you from Ireland? Just like who does that kind of a thing. And it's just like these subtle things that aren't harmful. They're not like gonna hurt me in any capacity, but it's just like they happen so frequently, they get annoying to me. So that's the kind of thing. But then there's also the other situation where I do get like catcalled walking down the street based on the color of my skin, like screaming like racial slurs or, you know, ni hao ma, and it's just like things. Actually, what happened one time, I was in the communications course with Landmark, and someone actually came up to me and said ni hao ma, and I was just like instantly triggered, and I just like I was like, yeah, okay, and then I like walked away because I was so triggered. And I realized later in that course that it was because I was associating with my past lived experience, and that like walking down the street, guys would roll down their windows and scream that at me. So it was just like making that association from the past was triggering me, where I didn't want to interact with that guy, even though he was just kind of being ignorant and he meant no harm. He was nice, innocent. He wasn't hitting on me or anything like that, but it was just like my instant reaction because of my past experience. But then there was also all the past shame that I've dealt with in that, yes, I'm Chinese, but I don't speak Chinese. So there's like a lifetime of shame that I've been dealt with that. So I get annoyed for that reason. So those are just some of my many, many experiences as an Asian American woman in the US.
Wow. And have you found over the last 4 years that it's gotten worse? Because I mean, all of the hate crime stuff I'm seeing, it seems to be directed because of the Chinese virus stuff that that our late president used to say. That it's been targeted. So
yeah, I think it has, especially in this past year, it has gotten worse. There's thousands of Asian hate crimes. There's attacks, like there have been attacks in the Bay Area where like people would just like go shove an 80 or 90-year-old Asian man for no reason. And I was just like, they're just innocently on a walk and like one died. And I was just like, this is not okay in society where like there's so much division and hate to that extreme. And I think it's just like a lack of understanding, a lack of communication, a lack of like education, like all the things you were talking about. And yeah, it's not acceptable by any means. It's like the subtle things, I kind of see it as on a gradient of yeah, like there's subtle things like saying ni hao ma without ill intention, low harm, but still technically racist to some degree. Yes, technically still racist. And then there's like extreme levels of like killing people. That's way not okay. But it's just like still we have to like at the source of it is still miscommunication, misunderstandings, kind of assumptions based on what you're fed through the media. And yeah, we need to close that gap. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Well, this has been illuminating. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, sorry, I got in a whole tangent. So I'm sure Donovan has some questions. I was talking too long. So go for it.
Not a huge question, just an observation as the conversation was unfolding, which it's something we've touched on before on here. But it sounds like one of the core issues and one of the core things that people really need to think about is the type of assumptions that they end up making and how that comes across, because I think it's really easy to take one or two data points if you don't have exposure, like we were talking about earlier. If you have almost no information, you take those one or two things and hold them as actual beliefs of how you think things really are. And I think like slowing down and really thinking about, what do I know about this group of people? What do I know about this individual person, right? People are individuals, and picking out what people look like and making an assumption based on that is just going to prove wrong so much of the time. It's like when I'm out with my siblings, a lot of times people will say like, "Oh, this is your brother, like he must be adopted." Like, nope, sure isn't. He's not. That's not a thing. And those kinds of assumptions, they don't gain anything for you, right? You don't get anything by saying, by just assuming someone speaks a certain language, or that someone has a certain background, or that someone has certain traits, or whatever else. So anyway, that's just something that kind of struck me as the conversation was unfolding, is that the root of a lot of these things are just these assumptions based on almost no information. And I think it could be helpful for people to just really think about what they actually know about individuals before just going out on a limb and saying something, or asking a very pointed and directed question when they have no other background.
I think that is an excellent piece of advice. Because what you're forced to do then is take people as they are, people, and then build based on your getting to know them process, not based on any preconceived notion of who they are. And that, I think, can serve everybody well.
Absolutely.
And hopefully avoid some of these awkward conversations and assumptions.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. Donovan has just given us a formula for how we should approach people in life.
Right. Blank slate. We don't know anything.
You're a human being.
Everyone's a human being. Everyone's just trying to get by in life. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Maya, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on our show. Is there anything you'd like to plug before we wrap up today?
I do want to return to my husband's book, We're Better Than This, My Fight for the Future of Our Democracy. It really is a good read, and it's gotten 2 NAACP nominations for 2 NAACP Image Awards in the area of outstanding literary work, debut author, and outstanding literary work, nonfiction. And the audio version of it, if you don't like to read, has just been nominated for Best Audiobook of the Year from the American Publishers Association.
Wow.
So I encourage you all to check it out. It's a really great read. And he's talking about what we all must do to preserve and defend and protect our democracy so that, we can be free in this country.
Excellent. Yeah. Is there any part of the audiobook that actually Elijah has any speaking parts, or is it?
So we recorded it after his passing.
Oh, after his passing. Okay.
So the person who's actually playing Elijah's voice is Lawrence Fishburne. You know him?
No, where is he
He
from?
is a Hollywood actor. He was Neo in, no, not Neo, but what was he in the Matrix?
Morpheus.
Or
Oh,
Morpheus.
Morpheus?
Morpheus.
Oh, the guy that plays Morpheus? Whoa. Oh my God, I love his voice. That's awesome. Now I gotta go get the audiobook version.
And so we've got Speaker Nancy Pelosi. She's
Oh,
putting her
wow.
forward. Lawrence Fishburne reads Elijah's voice, and then I do the afterword. So
wow.
I have a small part there too.
That's awesome. Oh man, yeah, I gotta get the audiobook version. Yeah, so so the book for everyone, just to recap, it's called We're Better Than This: My Fight for the Future of Our Democracy by Congressman Elijah Cummings. This is his he had passed away, what has it been, almost a year now? Or
October 2019.
October. Wow. Oh, 2019. Oh, so a year and a half.
Yeah.
Wow. And he's still like making an impact in the world beyond the grave, which is incredible. And you're bringing his legacy across the country and sharing his wisdom and his knowledge and closing that gap. That's incredible.
It's the least I can do. He was an amazing man.
Yeah,
and I'm
absolutely.
honored and privileged to be in his life.
Definitely. Great. Well, it's been an honor and privilege to have you on our show and share all these amazing things that I think will really help people get a better understanding of each other and hopefully be open to getting educated and understanding like that we're all human at the core of what it is that we are. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you for having me. It's so
Yeah.
great to see you, and
Absolutely.
it's a pleasure to meet you.
Likewise.
Great. All right. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.
You can check out more content at howtohappy.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up to date on the videos. We've also got a Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook that you can check out. Reflect, take action, and enjoy life. See you next time.